On today's episode,
I think it was Macquarie. They said that in 2000, medical knowledge was doubling every 5 years. In 2010, they thought it was every 3.5 years. In 2020, they thought it was every 73 days because of the enormous amount of money that came in during COVID. I think we are going to enter a golden age. I think that science just opens so many doors.
Welcome to the Active Share podcast that explores less obvious investing insights in a world that's always changing. I'm your host, Hugo Scott-Ball. Today, I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Greg Bailey, co-founder and executive chairman of Juvenescence. Dr. Bailey is a physician, financier, and biotech entrepreneur, passionate about longevity and the science of aging. In his career, he has co-founded Ascent Healthcare Solutions, played a key role in the founding and financing of Medivation, which was acquired by Pfizer, and been involved in ventures like Biohaven Pharmaceuticals and Portage Biotech. The companies he's been involved with have created $25 billion of value through various biotech mergers and acquisitions, completed 5 successful exits, 3 public listings, and 2 successful phase 3 drug trials. Dr. Bailey, Greg, welcome to the Active Share.
Thank you very much, Hugo, for having me.
In a minute, you're going to tell us the secret to eternal life.
No pressure.
No pressure, but big reveal that I think pretty much everyone wants to know the answer to. But before we get there, let's talk about you and your journey. You started out as a physician working in what the UK we call accident and emergency, and now you're a biotech entrepreneur with a long list of illustrious achievements trying to solve aging. How did you start there, and how did you get to here?
I guess I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial aspect, and if you're doing A&E or emergency medicine, it's called the North America, you are only allowed to work a certain number of hours, and you graduate medical school, you're a workaholic. So, you're allowed to do 40 hours, and it means there's 128 hours left to do. So I started looking at other opportunities, began syndicating real estate to doctors in Toronto, which is where I'm from, and gradually got a name as a doctor, had a little bit of business acumen, so I was headhunted to work on 2 biotech ventures, and that was the slippery slope.
You've ended up on aging. Why did you target aging? Because you had, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the drugs you've been worked with and been involved with, I think the number 1 selling prostate cancer drug, the number 1 migraine drug. So those are not, they help with aging, but that's not necessarily where you are now. How did you alight on how to extend people's healthy lives, their lifespan?
So my personal journey actually began meeting a gentleman named Luigi Fontana, who was one of the top doctors in the world for caloric restriction. And what we knew was caloric restriction. We're starting to begin to talk about the secrets of life. So pay attention to your audience, that will allow you to live longer, healthy. It's 1,800 calories for men, 1,200 calories for women. And so I thought that was very interesting. And then the next year I was at an event and Walter Longo presented. Walter said, you don't have to chronic caloric restriction, 1,800 calories and 1,200 calories. He said that if you do once every month, if you're overweight, once every 3 months, if you're normal weight, and once every 6 months. And Walter, I apologize if those numbers have changed. 5 days, 800 calories, that you literally reset your body. And the hypothesis that my scientists have generated is that it sort of tricks your body into thinking it's going to a fasting state, and it begins to process energy in a different way, which spares an engine in your cell called mitochondria. We don't know that. That's just a theory. But that this process literally has a similar effect to caloric restriction. And that process and that diet has become very well known. Walter sells it under the name Prolong. So that was interesting. So caloric restriction, intermittent fasting, intriguing. This is like 14, 15 years ago. Then I bumped into Peter Attia, and Peter and I were talking about diet. And one of the aspects that your body goes insulin resistant around 45, 50 years of age, plus or minus 5 years. And this is your different organs, which means that the organ can no longer process sugar properly, causing the sugar to go sky high in your brain, in your heart, in your muscles. We hypothesized at that time that may be type 3 diabetes, that, this really high sugar in your brain leads to one of the forms of Alzheimer's disease. So you could modify this. And then Walter Bortz, head of gerontology at Stanford, bumped into him, former head, and he said that he felt that if you're fit, you mentally and physically decline at 0.5% a year, unfit 2% a year. That's a heck of a delta. Then I thought, Hugo, there's nothing magical about caloric restriction. There's nothing magical about changing how your body deals with blood sugar or the sugar content or exercise. It must be working on a cellular level. And then I began to see all the studies that were coming out. Scientists were beginning to understand the pathways that cause your cells to age. And the one thing I know about scientists, if they can see the pathways, they will figure out how to tinker with them. So I began to work with my two business partners and said, this is coming. This is going to be a huge thing. Last point was, it almost felt like a responsibility. I've been very fortunate, as you mentioned in the prologue, in that the companies I've dealt with have raised a lot of money, been very successful. And I thought this nascent industry is going to struggle for credibility and to raise money. And so it's going to have a difficult time getting the money and attracting the right people. And it felt like a responsibility, candidly, for myself and my partners to try and build something, because we thought we can raise money and we can attract great people to this opportunity to change the healthy trajectory of the world, everyone.
So I get it, right? And for a lot of people, how much would they pay to live longer? But more importantly, how much would they pay to live healthier? So if progress is about solving problems, this is clearly a big, big problem. If you are a person who scores highly on fitness, those annoying people who sleeps for at least 8 hours a night, sleep deeply, and never gets stressed, and has fantastic nutrition, only drinks water, is that enough? I mean, is that going to help you live a long time and live healthy, or do you need more than that? And that way medicine comes in. So the answer can lie within us if we get all those things right, but very, very few people do. And they're probably very boring if you meet them. So is it those key things that are natural, or is it actually you need something else? Can you talk a bit about those things? I listed fitness, sleep, stress, and nutrition, but I think you're going to say that fitness is the real goal.
It's a biggie. So, and I'll steal this from Peter Attia. You can start off flying at 10,000 feet, and then you begin to decline starting at age 60, 70, and then you end, the flight ends. Or if you're at 30,000 feet, you just push that whole curve out. So the lifestyle things push the curve out. So if you do, your blood pressure's under control, you're not smoking, your nutrition's good, you're fit, you're sleeping, you literally start at a much higher point when there's the aging decline. What the extraordinary thing is for your audience is the aspect that we're beginning to understand why your body declines, what pathways are involved with that, and how to modify those pathways. So you will live longer healthy by doing the things that you've just mentioned, Hugo. But to really push to 120, 150 and being healthy, it's a whole different thing. So when we started the company, there was a group that challenged me and they said, what do you want Juvenescence, that's the name of my company, to be in 10 years? And they said, by the way, do you want to guess what Uber said? And I said, rideshare. And they said, no, they want to be the moving company. They want to move everything. They want to move you. They want to move your food. They want to do it by plane, helicopter. I said, well, then we want to be the aging company. And so if I'm really going to solve for aging, I have to figure out Alzheimer's, because nobody wants to live to 150 if the last 60 years of their life they have Alzheimer's. Nobody wants to be in a wheelchair for the last 60 years of their life. So how do I regenerate tissues? How do I slow cellular aging? You have to do this multifactorial thing. And so Juvenescence is trying to address all of those. Our scientists were able to cut off the limb of a living entity and regrow that limb. It was in a frog, and they've subsequently begun to do it in a mouse, which is a mammal like us. And science fiction is becoming science. I mean, that's just extraordinary. So you hurt your knee skiing, and we may be able to help you with the damage. Or if your liver begins to fail, we may be able to regrow, not give you a liver, we give you your liver. And I tell people this can happen so much faster than you think. So it'll be all of these elements to answer your question.
Yeah, so maybe go a step back. So the reason we age is even if you do all the things, even if you're the sort of perfect person I described, you're still going to age. And the reason you're aging is what?
They have what they're called the hallmarks of aging, things that just change within your body, the ability to not clear toxic materials the way you used to. I talked about the mitochondria, the engine of the cell begins to falter, and I'll explain why that is. And so the materials that it's not clearing, it's called autophagy. There's that mitochondrial, the DNA begins to fracture. So depending on who you read, some people have 15 hallmarks of aging, some people have 8. But just to take mitochondria as an example, because it's a biggie, because the minute the mitochondria, which gives your cells energy, is gone, the cell dies. And it's, to me, an easy way to understand it. It's like, Hugo, if you have a fireplace in your house and you don't clean the chimney, eventually the more logs you burn, it will close the chimney and the fireplace will cease to work. As your cells begin to use energy, they create they're called reactive oxygen species, and they are cleared very well when you're young, and they cease to be cleared as well as you get older. So by the time you're 70 or 80, it's not working. The chimney is beginning to close down. So, but we understand that now. And we understand that these oxygen species that are negative, reactive oxygen species, we may be able to modify them with antioxidants. So a number of things that we can do to begin to modify that. There's 4 main cellular pathways that people talk about. There's one that's very popular in the press called NAD. And we know that NAD decreases as you age, and that is part of the energy cycle for the cell. And so people are trying to take NAD to boost it in their cell. Problem is, it's got to get into your body, it's got to get into the cell. So it's not just that easy. But part of the reason it's declining is because of an enzyme called CD38, which increases as you age, and it destroys NAD. So me taking that product without modifying the CD38 pathway means that I'm trying to fill a bathtub with the sink open.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about, we've established kind of what it is that causes aging. And we've established that even if I live this monastic lifestyle of perfect things, no stress and nutrition, that's not going to be enough. So if you talk a bit about the kind of the science products, the things that are in development to address these issues.
So a great segue. Thank you for that. So I mentioned CD38. There's an institute called the Buck Institute, 200 of the top scientists in the world working to try and solve aging. They have a magnificent building in Northern California, and they created a product which is a CD38 inhibitor. So by this time next year, we will have that in human trials, and to try and modify the NAD that I just talked about. So this is really fascinating because what we try to do at my company, I'm sure other biotech companies doing the same thing. I don't want to give you NAD really high because it's on a feedback loop with other cellular pathways. I want to bring you back to a physiological level of when you were 35 or 40. So I'm not trying to spuriously raise it. I'm trying to get it to a physiological level. So by decreasing the enzyme, I can hopefully get it to the right level for your cells so it doesn't influence the other 3 major cellular pathways. So that's coming, and there's clotho pathway. There's a number of other pathways that we aren't working on, but others are. It's really fascinating. And then there's the modifying genes, which is really exciting as well.
How far away are we from being able to access drugs, I guess, that can address some of the inherent aging issues that everyone has? But I mean, the things you could do about lifestyle inflicted aging, but just natural genetic. How far away that I will be able to go to a specialist who says, you know what, if you take these things and these things in combination, this is going to really make a difference. So I guess that's probably the question on most people's lips. Hopefully it is. That's my job to ask them. But how far away are we from the next stage of, I guess, more efficacious, more scientifically proven aging treatments?
So some people may know about a drug called rapamycin, which was discovered on Easter Island by the statues in the soil. So it was clearly left by the aliens to help us age. And lo and behold, this is indeed an anti-aging drug. There's a pathway called mTOR, which is one of the four major pathways. It's an acronym for mammalian target of rapamycin. So this drug literally is influencing this pathway that's now named after it. And it's used now for immunosuppression and during transplants. But it conceivably could be an anti-aging drug that we have today. A number of the top scientists in this sector are on this drug for anti-aging properties. The problem is we haven't done a proper clinical trial, so nobody can tell you the right dose. Is it 10 milligrams, 20 milligrams? Nobody knows. And some very good research has been on dogs by Matt Kaberlin at Washington University. I believe, unless he's changed his mind, the best regimen for that. And please, everybody, I'm not your doctor. You need to consult the doctor for this. You will anyway to get the prescription, and they probably won't give it to you. And last time I talked to him, it was 6 milligrams once a week for 10 weeks, 3-month holiday, and then repeat the cycle. And I think Peter Attia is on a different dose. And Peter has a book called Outlive that many of your audience may have read on the science of what's going on. So that's going on. The other thing I'll say is there's already an anti-aging drug on the market. It's doing incredible sales. I think it's going to do 150 billion, the class. And that's the Ozempic, the GLP-1s, Mounjaro from Lilly. They increase how long people live by decreasing the diseases that so many people have by being overweight, by having metabolic syndrome. A real shocker, and again, I apologize if there's been more research on it, but I think it's Schulman at Yale did, and he tested 21, 22-year-old Yale students, slim, in reasonably good shape, and found that 25% of them, I believe, were already insulin resistant. So they were already having sugar beginning to destroy or doing damage to their organs. So these sort of tests that we can do and these sort of drugs are going to have a profound effect. And some of them are already here, like the GLP-1s, Ozempic or rapamycin. And there'll be, in 5 to 7 years, there'll be 5 more on the market.
And the thing there is that they reduce inflammation.
Inflammation is a huge piece of the puzzle, but it's more complex than that. To truly solve aging is going to be very, very complicated. May need quantum computing. I don't even think our current computing can deal with it. It's very good in drug discovery. AI is very good for chemistry because it's pattern recognition and it can look at 20 million things in a nanosecond, which would take, human years to look at to try and find interesting looking chemical compounds. But it's rubbish at biology because biology is chaos theory and it's not there yet. So similarly with unlocking therapies for anti-aging, it's going to be complicated, but there's some low-hanging fruit, like potentially rapamycin or the GLP-1s like Ozempic and semaglutide, Mounjaro.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, which is when you think about drug development, there are several ingredients. Clearly, there's pre-existing medical knowledge, which probably has been accelerated by understanding of the genome. But there's a limitation too as well, which is just availability of data. And then there's compute. And we know that there's something of a revolution going on in compute power, which is basically, let's just call it the next generation of compute power is called right now generative AI. So if you put a very valuable problem to solve, which is aging, we know that when guys in Silicon Valley get very rich, what do? They usually suddenly start looking a bit younger, start looking a bit more fun. And then they start talking about living forever. And possibly sometimes they change their wives. And it's usually years time. So turns out that very rich people will spend a lot of money to live for a very long time, if that's possible. So it's a valuable problem worth solving. Is this next generation of compute power going to be enough, or are we going to have to wait for quantum computing? But I think what I'm saying, to preempt your answer, is that within a decade, if we carry on the same curve of rate of change in computing power, this could really begin to unlock better drugs to treat aging. So that really is quite, I guess, exciting. Is that, am I overstating not position?
No, I mean, as I said, the minute you begin to know the pathways, scientists can begin to play with it. And then when you throw in unlocking the human genome, understanding the deep mind, the extraordinary thing that Google people have where they now understand the proteins. So DNA uses RNA to create proteins. Proteins are messenger RNA, and then the proteins actually work on the cellular level, and then they create metabolites. We know how many DNA gene. We know how many genes you have. We have an idea of most of the proteins. Metabolites is a whole different thing. But these metabolites could be very important. And again, you're going to really need the AI to sort out them because there's millions. So it's coming, and it's coming very quickly. So I think you have pictured it well. And then to rebalance those four cellular pathways, mTOR, the target of rapamycin, NAD, which I mentioned, the other ones are AMPK and sirtuins. They're on a feedback loop. And I think to actually get them to the right balance for you is going to be very different than what the medication I would have to take. So precision medications, and I think the AI is going to play a huge role. The other big one that people aren't talking about is actually using AI in clinical trials. With our cancer agent at Medivation, we had to wait, I think it was 11 months to see a positive signal. With AI, it might say after 1 month, you have a 99% chance the drug is going to work because it can just immediately see the pattern that we can't see, which will expedite drugs, which will have an extraordinary effect and save money and hopefully mean drugs, which when it comes to buy them will be less expensive because you didn't have to go through the $800 million of clinical trials.
Yeah. And I think that you never quite know all the effects of a primary innovation, but you really meaningfully change compute power. You unearth a lot more value in an existing data set, and then you combine that with other data sets, and things really good things start happening. So with your sort of biotech investor hat on, do you think we're about to enter a golden age of return on R&D? And that might be with higher levels of R&D, or it might even be actually your drug development costs go down, so you can spend the same dollars, but just on more different drug research. So do you think we are perhaps entering into technologically enabled a bit of a golden age? Does that get you pretty excited as a biotech investor?
I think it was Macquarie. They said that in 2000, medical knowledge was doubling every 5 years. In 2010, they thought it was every 3.5 years. In 2020, they thought it was every 73 days because of the enormous amount of money that came in during COVID. I think we are going to enter a golden age. I think that science just opens so many doors. Since stepping down as the CEO of Juvenescence, I have 3 pillars. One is pass on the knowledge I've learned from the top scientists in the world. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to chat here. 2 is to convince payers, whether it's national healthcare services or insurance companies, that we've got to change from what our current model is, which is sick care. You get sick, hopefully you have a cure or at least a treatment, to prevention, which will render enormous savings economically. And the third one is convince people that they can invest in biotech. The number of people who say, I don't have an MD or a PhD, I can't invest in biotech. I've had so many times during my career, and I tell them, do you have shares in Tesla? Do you have shares in JP Morgan? Can you run a bank? Could you build a car? It's the same model that you have to look for when you're investing in biotech. And that is good management, diversified portfolio, enough capital to get through an inflection point, and you can make an extraordinary amount of money. So to your question about a golden age, if people are willing to do that, even if they take 1% of their net worth to dedicate to that, we will have an extraordinary renaissance. And it's going to be quite remarkable because, to your point, science is opening these doors. Great management with adequate capital will do it. So to the audience, this is a rare opportunity. Just make sure that it's a solid management team, make sure it's a diversified portfolio.
So impediments, taking the other side of that, the impediments may well be in the form of, I guess there's always regulation. Technology typically moves faster than regulation does. Capital, I suspect, is less of an impediment. And it may well be things like access actually to compute power, or the limitations that we just don't have enough data. I think this is a recurring theme around this next phase. Let's call it sort of Gen AI, which is we exhaust the existing data sets pretty quickly. But I wonder if that's sort of true in medicine, where the data set might not have been interrogated in the way that they're going to. But is there anything else I'm missing on our list of potential impediments that can slow things down? And really, I guess, to make it more specific around aging, this is a fairly new area, and are regulators ready when it comes to either approvals or availability, whatever it is? is there some education that's required first?
Yeah, regulatory is very important. I mean, their mandate obviously is to protect everyone, and sometimes they're overzealous. At a couple of my companies, we've certainly been shocked or at least surprised at what the regulators have come back to us with on things we presented. So, yes, there's going to be an education process to get the regulatory bodies to say, you know what, we're going to trust the AI that after 2 months it's saying the clinical trial is positive. We're going to let you have that as your interim readout and we're going to approve your drug. That's going to be a high hurdle. So there's definitely going to be a number of issues we're going to have to confront. Could we eliminate animal research by using the computers? Probably. Will the FDA accept it or the EU? That's a different question. So lots of issues, but I think fundamentally investing in biotech is just such an extraordinary, it's very similar to mining. You drill the hole, there's either oil or gold or whatever you're looking for there, and your stock goes up 15, 20x, or it's not, your stock gets cut in half if you have other properties. Similarly with biotech, literally you flick a switch, you have a positive phase 2 clinical trial, your valuation just increased by 20 to 30x. And you have a negative trial, it's going the other way. So a nice diversified portfolio works. But yeah, I think that there are technological issues that are going to confront the regulatory people, not the least of which is I can't run a 75-year clinical trial on a drug. So we have to get a biomarker panel that says, when you took my drug, this was your age, and in 1 year, you only aged 6 months. Greg Fahey and Stephen Horvath did that at UCLA in 2018. They gave people 2 drugs, 3 supplements. They measured what's called DNA methylation. Your DNA in your body methylates at different rates. And they showed that they measured it before the clinical trial, they measured it after the clinical trial. And in the period of time that they gave the drug, the 2 years, the people only aged. During the 1 year, their actual biological age, according to DNA methylation, dropped by 2 years. By the way, if we could do that every year with different combinations of drugs, you live forever. You have escape velocity. Because if I can add 2 years for every year, you escape. And gross oversimplification, but just how people are thinking about it in anti-aging. And we're not sure whether your cells will even, go past 150.
So I've got a couple more questions I want to ask you. One is on your own personal regimen and what you do, because I think the concept of skin in the game is really, really important, particularly when it comes to the world of medicine and the practitioners. But before that, have you thought much, and this is not a medical question, this is perhaps more philosophical, existential, around what does the world look like? What does society look like if people are really living a lot longer? Now, an economist would tell you that creates real problems because older people aren't necessarily productive and they need to be funded by working age populations. And so aging is a real stress for societies. But that might not be true if older people are productive. So do you think, well, actually that's pretty exciting. People live longer, but they're healthier for longer and therefore they can remain productive. And do you think that people who've grown up thinking they were maybe going to live till, 75, 80, and suddenly they're going to find they can live to 100, 110, that's just maybe just too much for their brains to cope with?
I'm glad you asked. It's a very complicated question. A gentleman named Andrew Scott has written extensively on the 100-year life and the different indications. Harvard ran a study and said we all lived to 150 and they could increase the population by 3% by the end of the century. So it's not crazy numbers. But what I will say with this is, to your point, we have an inverted demographic pyramid. We do not have enough young people to support the elderly, where it could be the next major economic crisis. But if I can take an 84-year-old who 85, pick a number, and they're still healthy, they're still got, corpus mentis, they can do what they do, and they continue to participate in society, then it changes everything. Interestingly, the difference between when you're healthy and when you die, which is the difference between health span and lifespan in the developed world, is 10 years, except in Denmark, where it's 3 years. Nobody knows why, or I don't know why. And basically, wouldn't it be great if it was 1 year, 1 week, 1 day? To your point, we were talking before this week went on air. Wouldn't it be great to be healthy right up till the end? So that changes everything. And that's the goal. So when we were starting the company, asked what, myself and my partners, what we were trying to do, we said, we want to add 10 healthy years to your life. If we do that, we give you an extra day of the week. I mean, it's that profound. And the economic consequences are huge. So Yeah, there we need to do that. The other element, though, is to your question is, if I had we were living to 200, do I create bubble people who won't go outside, who won't drive a car, for fear that they're going to lose 150 a year? What are the mental, issues with this? And they're profound. Will suicide go through the roof? I'm guessing it'll certainly jump. So there are issues. And what we're trying to do from my side, as far as a drug developer, is give you the optionality. You don't have to take the drugs. And somebody said, well, my friends are all going to be dead. I'm like, the drug's not just for you. Your friends are going to have the drug as well, by the way, just so you know. But yeah, there's going to be big issues we're going to have to confront. But the fact that people are healthier longer, extraordinary effect on our society. And by the way, I'm never telling the French people that they're going to have to work past 64. I mean, I saw what happened with the riots before when they added a 2 year. They may have to work 10 to 15 years longer. That's a bridge too far for me. I'm not bringing that one up.
Yes, that's an appetite for risk that even you as a biotech entrepreneur don't have. Can we talk skin in the game, your regimen, without getting too personal, but how you live your life, the things you're currently doing? I mean, I guess there's probably a list of them, but just the sort of, this is not doctoral advice to anyone, but just interested in how the things you do.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. People come to work for us. Literally, you can see the change in their lifestyle. You just can't be around it without acknowledging that these are not the hardest things to change. So, find something you enjoy fitness-wise. In a perfect world, you should mix some endurance training with some weight training, with some yoga, Pilates for flexibility, high-intensity training, which is fantastic because in 13 minutes, you get the same effect as running 10 miles or 10 kilometers. So mix of exercise, but gardening works. I mean, just pick your spot. It has to be something you enjoy. The next thing I would say is nutrition. The Mediterranean diet, by and large, for most people in Europe and North America is probably the right one. There's definitely an ethnocentric element to it. Japanese people can eat white rice with impunity and don't seem to get diabetes. If we ate the same amount, we'd probably get diabetes. And then as many fruits and vegetables as you can eat. When I met Walter Longo, I said, how do you do 1,800 calories per man? He said, eat as many fruits and vegetables as you want in a day and limit your protein to 30 grams, which is wrong, by the way. We now know that number's wrong. But by the end of the day, I didn't want to see another celery stick. I was like done. I was losing crazy weight doing that. Now we know it's 1 gram per kilogram, pretty much, unless you're doing incredibly strenuous exercise or doing strenuous exercise, is a good number for protein. And then sleep, as you mentioned, as much as you can do to try to get those 7 to 8 hours. But number one is fitness. Number two is nutrition. I'm doing all of these. I do 10 to 12 servings of vegetables a day. I do 3 to 5 servings of fruit a day. Always include spinach and broccoli and cauliflower and blueberries because they're neuroprotective. And I try to do this to spread the protein out over the day as opposed to one big sitting. They seem to think that works. I give myself a chance to sleep for 8 hours almost every night. I do a mix of exercise, and then I do supplements that I've vetted with the various scientists and a couple of drugs.
Once things become a habit, they cease to feel like a chore, right? You get used to doing
100%.
that. Great. Well, look, I want to say thank you very much for coming on the show. It was serendipity that we bumped into each other on a beach in the island of eternal youth in the Mediterranean. But I'm glad we met. I'm very pleased you came on the show. Thanks for sharing your history as an investor, but also just frankly where we are on the cutting edge versus aging.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And as I said, I hope your audience gets comfortable enough to invest in this sector. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Active Share. The Active Share is available on iTunes, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, and Spotify. And if you'd like, please leave us a review. To hear additional insights from William Blair Investment Management, visit us at active.williamblair.com and follow us on Instagram at WilliamBlairIM.
This content is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice or a recommendation to buy or sell any security or to adopt any investment strategy. Investment advice and recommendations can be provided only after careful consideration of investors' objectives, guidelines, and restrictions. The views and opinions expressed are those of the speakers as of the date of this recording, are subject to change without notice as economic and market conditions dictate, and may not reflect the views and opinions of other investment teams within William Blair Investment Management. Factual information has been obtained from sources we believe to be reliable, but its accuracy, completeness, or interpretation cannot be guaranteed. Any discussion of particular topics is not meant to be comprehensive and may be subject to change. This material may include forecasts, estimates, outlooks, projections, and other forward-looking statements. Due to a variety of factors, actual events may differ significantly from those presented. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. Any investment or strategy mentioned herein may not be suitable for every investor. References to specific companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice or a recommendation to buy or sell any security. William Blair Investment Management may or may not own any securities of the companies referenced. It should not be assumed that any investment in the companies referenced was or will be profitable.